right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern day spiritual paradise. No trees were harmed in the making of this particular episode, and we're going to ignore the fact that they've harmed a lot of trees with those time slips in the past. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder ministerial servant, most importantly, a little guy raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses with a unique perspective from my generation, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and more. As I like to do here, just a warning, we try to have some fun here. We try to heal. There's lots of virtual hugs. There's lots of understanding. There's lots of sarcasm, humor, and more. It all comes from me. And please know that it is never, ever meant to offend anyone, just my own unique perspective. So I have to ask, how's everybody doing? How are we this week? 2 weeks after learning that for most of us, our entire lives as a Jehovah's Witness was a waste of time. And I got to tell you, I wanted to do a shout out to those that I spoke to or dealt with as an elder, the inactive ones, the inactive publishers. A huge shout out for getting over on this organization, and apparently at this point, getting new light before the governing body got the new light by not participating in field service or turning in time anymore. A huge shout out to those inactive ones who apparently had it figured out all along. No word yet on how they got the new light versus the governing body. We'll get back to you. But I'll tell you, here we are a week later, at least for me, and I got a bit of a confession. I'm finding it hard to find anything meaningful to talk about. Anything. The annual meeting just completely obliterated so much of what is remotely interesting about our experiences as Jehovah's Witnesses, so bear with me. With the 9 guys in New York informing us of the changes to the Great Tribulation, as well as Jehovah no longer wanting our personal gifts of godly devotion, otherwise known as your field service hours, I spent all week wondering what there was left to talk about. I have to confess to you, I expect the younger people who were already leading a double life to run now headlong into actually having a real life. You know, things like college, dating, traveling, and more. I expect the older generation of Jehovah's Witnesses to now spend a lot of time being grumpy, bristling, doubling down on their judgmental attitudes of the past. After all, that's what they've learned for decades. They won't be talking about walking to school uphill without shoes in a driving snowstorm anymore, or screaming for those damn kids to get off their lawn. No, now the older generation of Jehovah's Witnesses will be telling anyone who will listen, we used to have to get out in minivans, drive around a random neighborhood, knock on doors, make presentations we prepared, and actually be able to use the Bible in a driving snowstorm uphill without any shoes. That's what I expect to see happen. I think that the cultural shift will be big. But I just sat here a week later trying to figure out what is there left to talk about? And I'm not even going to get started to how this is all going to affect the congregation culture. With older ones, especially who've wasted their lives in service to a cult, interacting with the younger JWs, the new generation who just have been standing next to book carts and now don't do much of even that anymore. I'm still coming down off the ceiling, as you could tell, after that annual meeting. And in brief moments, I actually laugh at how they just prove to the universe that they are indeed nothing more than a man-made cult. I think it's safe to say that we all wrestle with the reality that people we care about, innocent people, good people, are still going to continue on as Jehovah's Witnesses, despite all of this new light. And I guess for that reason, here I am. There's still stuff to talk about, despite my struggle to figure it all out. And as I stated last week, it's critical that we keep the history of this cult alive for future generations or just innocent people that are exposed to its message. They're going to need reference points. They're going to need proof. They're going to need history. They will need to see and hear the experiences of those that came before them. So how do I say this? You're stuck with me. Let's do this. I did the unthinkable this week. I did something so horrible, it would surely land me in a judicial meeting or maybe just get me marked in one of those famous marking talks. Do you want to know what I did? Boy, did I sin big time. This guy, this podcast host, went to a pumpkin patch. I know. You must be in a state of shock. This guy has truly gone flat out apostate. A Halloween-themed pumpkin patch? What a shameless sin. Wait, what? Jehovah's Witnesses go to pumpkin patches? They do? Yes, they do. Oh, wait, is this sort of like them going to fireworks shows on the 4th of July in the United States? Or going to Disneyland with their kids, visiting, the Magic Kingdom? What would Caleb say after throwing out his Sparlock toy? Yes. Who doesn't miss how Jehovah's Witnesses play on the edge of going to events promoting things like Thanksgiving or Halloween, like they're, not doing anything wrong? And as you can tell, I still enjoy laughing at the hypocrisy. But I digress. Back to the pumpkin patch. I went to one. Aside from having a pumpkin spice latte and some pumpkin cookies, why do you care? Why does it even matter what I did? Well, I saw something there that not only fed my emotions regarding, the annual meeting changes, a lifetime as a Jehovah's Witness, but it also triggered memories and thoughts in me that I haven't considered in a very, very long time. And as they say, timing is everything. And what I saw at that pumpkin patch couldn't have been better timing. It was right on time. You might be asking, what did you see? I saw a bunch of sheep. A bunch of sheep. There was other farm animals, but imagine how sheep drew my gaze. Now don't be confused. I'm talking about actual sheep, livestock. The pumpkin patch is a full-scale farm, and they had animals, all sorts of them. They even had a camel. Isn't that wild? It was great. But more importantly, they had sheep. And as I stood there sipping on my pumpkin spice latte made by the little coffee shack at the patch, I just watched the sheep. In some ways, I found myself envying the sheep. All warm and cozy, all seemingly getting along with each other, eating, pooping, all without a care. They really are cute little animals. They're cute little animals, aren't they? And we even actually got to feed them. As a guy plagued with OCD and a clean gene, they are, however, dirty looking, and there was a nice smell in the air. I won't go too far into that. You can guess, at least in this particular farm environment. And well, I've never been a big fan of wool either. I was reminded of that watching the sheep. It's itchy. I just don't like wool. But nonetheless, there they were. All cute, docile, unaffected by anything, including me standing there, even when I ran out of food to give them. They looked at me, I looked at them, and there was my day with a bunch of sheep. And I'm going to guess that you know what my mind drifted to. And particularly so following the annual meeting that changed all space and time just 2 weeks ago. I had one of those grins on my face as I stood there watching sheep and couldn't help but thinking, well, isn't this timely? Sheep hold a special place with Jehovah's Witnesses. You can't be a Jehovah's Witness without being compared to sheep. The faithful and discreet slave, otherwise known as the governing body since 2012, have spent decades encouraging good people to be more like sheep. Sheep are the animal to be in Jesus' organization on earth. And well, the memories came flooding back, as I mentioned. You might be asking, why? And frankly, it's a good question. A question I found myself reviewing as I fed the little woolly things. In a book that features talking animals, donkeys, she-bears killing kids for laughing at a bald guy, lions being torn in half by Samson or killed by David, bulls, we even got worms, and a host of other animals, none of this could have been written by a farming agricultural society, right? Still, it's sheep that are held up as precious right from the Bible. So great are sheep that even King Jesus of Jehovah's Witnesses is referred to as a sheep. At Revelation chapter 7 and verse 10, we get, quote, salvation we owe to our God who is seated on the throne and to the Lamb, end quote. Or how about John chapter 1 verse 29, where it tells us, quote, the next day he saw Jesus coming toward him, and he said, see, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, end quote. Even Jesus, the King of Jehovah's Witnesses, or so we are told, is compared to a sheep, a lamb, a little tiny sheep. So it's sheep that are seemingly the ultimate animal in all things Jehovah's Witnesses, with those who hope to live forever in a paradise earth with their own pet sheep, also comparing themselves as a person to sheep. And I must add, you never want to be compared to a goat. We got to throw that in here. Goats get a very bad rap in the Bible and in the world of Jehovah's Witnesses as well. Does that surprise you? No word yet on whether the goat population will take a hit as Armageddon begins, since everyone now, I don't know, gets a chance to just stand up and say, oh, look at that, Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm going to be a sheep. That's the new teaching. Yet another illustration and teaching on the billions of pages of Watchtower studies that now, I guess, mean really nothing. The sheep and the goats. The sheep and the goats, what does it all mean? You could convert to a sheep in the closing seconds, and I got to tell you, I just ache for the trees harmed in the making of that message. But back to sheep. As I stood there watching sheep, I realized a few things. And so, as has become a segment on the show, I'm sharing my random thoughts early in this episode. A couple of thoughts. First, the concept that a person should be a sheep or sheep-like always rubbed me the wrong way. I'm going to get it out of the way early. I didn't like it. As a kid, who wants to be a sheep? I wanted to be a lion or a black panther. I wanted to be something big, strong, fast, had a mind of its own. Aside from Jehovah choosing a bunch of guys, some of whom were shepherds by trade in the Bible, from a farming and agricultural society as writers of the Bible, that would primarily speak to the most critical generation in all of human history, featuring people that would carry things like cell phones, peruse something called the internet, and even transmit live images through something called television. Why would anyone look at the animal kingdom and say something like, skip that whole flying thing, like an eagle? I don't want to be an eagle. I think I want to be known as a sheep. And I was reminded in that moment, that holy book that Jehovah and Jesus had written for us in the 21st century by a bunch of guys who didn't even have a running toilet, clearly they were pretty enamored with sheep. And by extension, I couldn't help but think, I've yet in my life to meet a single person, a child or an adult, that names sheep as their favorite animal. Where could this have come from? Random thoughts with Stacy. I was also reminded that inspiration can come to someone as they carefully navigate a field filled with sheep shit. I discovered that myself. Despite everything I was seeing, smelling, and attempting to step over and avoid, you can find clarity among sheep. And clarity is what I found And it pains me to say this, but the chief random thought that I landed on, standing there among the sheep, was Jehovah's Witnesses are indeed sheep. And I can boldly say that as respectfully as possible because, look, I too was a sheep. I know what it feels like to be among the sheep, and not just at the pumpkin patch. I'm talking among Jehovah's Witnesses. And I want to state right now that I'm not trying to insult Jehovah's Witnesses. They are filled with wonderful people, or even those, I want to say this, or even those that believe in the Bible as inspired of God. I've commented on the Bible itself many times, and I do my best to respect that some do believe it's a magical book filled with all wise instructions about life and salvation. I'm also not trying to upset anyone associated that has good reasons to stay as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, if you listen closely, I've even encouraged some to stay in some form just so they can keep their family intact or to have the freedom to speak or be with their family. So none of this is meant as an insult. But it also can't be denied. I arrived at the conclusion, standing there among those little furry creatures, yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses, as much as it pains me to say it, are really sheep. But especially following the latest revelation of New Light, I'm here going to explore all things sheep when it comes to those people trapped in that cult, as well as why the entire concept and illustration and comparison makes me sick. And more importantly, why everyone, particularly a Jehovah's Witness that may be here, should be paying attention to being a sheep. Aside from sheep not being particularly dynamic, it's how they point to sheep. Yeah, I know, using the Bible itself to describe what you as a Jehovah's Witness should be. And listen, public service announcement right here, that should scare you. That should alarm you. You're likely already seeing this using the recent example, as I mentioned, the annual meeting. Look, it's new, it's raw. And I guess in many ways, what I'm sharing here is mostly for a Jehovah's Witness that may be bravely listening. There you go. For those that may be here, you're welcome and safe here. But some of this is going to be hard to hear. It's going to be tough to hear. Trust me, I've been there. I had to shed the wool myself. When you've got the entire animal kingdom at your disposal when creating a hard-hitting illustration, why did they use sheep? And again, aside from a bunch of guys that didn't have a running toilet being chosen to write it in the Bible, I'm not going to explore that per se. I believe the governing body uses the Bible and the illustration of sheep to leverage those little stinky, soft, docile animals to their benefit. There is a reason why the Bible itself and the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses downright encourages, you might even say demands, that Jehovah's Witnesses be sheep. And many are about to demonstrate this right before our eyes by ignoring what recently happened at the annual meeting a couple weeks ago. Sheep will accept anything. And I'm not a rocket scientist, but they make it so easy by just admitting it. Join me as we take a look at the Insight book, Volume 2, under the article Sheep. And there they give a real-life experience to land the point home about how everyone who wants to live forever should be like the woolly creatures. There in a quote, Researches in Greece and the Levant by J. Hartley, London, 1831, pages 321, 322, quoted in the Insight book, they wanted witnesses to know this, quote, having had my attention directed last night to the words in John chapter 3, I asked my man if it was unusual in Greece to give names to the sheep. He informed me that it wasn't, and that sheep obeyed the shepherd when he called them by their names. This morning I had an opportunity of verifying the truth of this remark. Passing by a flock of sheep, I asked the shepherd the same question which I had put to my servant, and he gave me the same answer. I then bade him to call one of his sheep. He did so, and it instantly left its pasturage and its companions, and ran up to the hand of the shepherd with signs of pleasure and with a prompt obedience which I had never before observed in any other animal. It is also true of the sheep in this country that a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him. The shepherd told me that many of his sheep are still wild, that they had not yet learned their names, but that by teaching they would all learn them. End quote. It's from a book, Researches in Greece, J. Hartley. But the Insight book continues with an unbelievable remark, a tiny little sentence that says it all. Quote, sheep allow themselves to be led, and they faithfully follow their shepherd. They can learn to recognize his voice and to respond to him alone. End quote. You see, standing in that pumpkin patch, sipping on that latte, it became so obvious to me watching them. You see, sheep follow. They're followers. They obey. They obey blindly. They eat what is thrown down on the ground. They just stand there and they consume. And then they poop. I got to see that. But does any of that sound familiar to you if you're a Jehovah's Witness or someone that used to be? Sheep consume and they obey. And as stated there, even watching them as livestock, the illustration in comparison from the Bible and leveraged by the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses is a powerful one. Sheep allow themselves to be led. And at the risk of being OCD repetitive, I'm going to say it again. They are followers. They obey. So if you're a witness and your mind is drifting anywhere like mine did, standing there in the beautiful farm, you probably thought about a few things like this. Imagine a thinking creature that allowed 9 guys in upstate New York that they will likely never meet or even know to talk to them and their children and convince them that it's okay to die. Instead of taking blood, instead of taking that card, instead of not being neutral in your country. Imagine giving up a life of even having a child. Imagine sending the 9 guys in New York your money, your stocks, your retirement money. Imagine working for them for free without a wage. Imagine giving up companionship or love because, well, you're both men and they told you they don't like it. Imagine going to prison to protect their literature and their teachings while they enjoy a state-of-the-art resort complex with a view of a lake. Imagine telling you everything you've taught strangers and believed yourself just changed again, and you've wasted your entire life. Then, most importantly, like that woolly little creature, imagine you keep obeying them. Anyway, while sipping the pumpkin latte and talking to those sheep, the reminders and the emotions, they came flooding back to me. Sheep blindly obey. It's their nature. And they've been groomed by their shepherds to do 2 things: consume and obey. And so have Jehovah's Witnesses. A baptized Jehovah's Witness will stare death, misery, poverty, loneliness, and much more right in the face and continue unabated to obey 9 guys in New York they've never even met. Consume, obey, consume, obey. And the governing body uses this comparison week after week, and has been doing it for well over a century. How else can you explain millions of people reading the following in their literature, not batting an eye, and then obeying it? From the Watchtower of 2013, November 15th, page 20, we get this. And I've had it here before. It's one of the most damning, unbelievable quotes in all their literature. It says, quote, "At that time, the life-saving direction that we receive from Jehovah's organization may not appear practical from a human standpoint. All of us must be ready to obey any instructions we may receive, whether these appear sound from a strategic or human standpoint or not." End quote. Please listen to that again. Or better yet, if you're a witness, please, or anyone, go look the reference up so you can see it in print in your literature. But make no mistake, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, and in the least you're thinking, "I've never heard that quote before, it was in your magazine," or in the worst, you're just obeying it, it becomes pretty damn clear that you've been conditioned to be a sheep. Consume and obey. And when you read that quote, it directly compares to any cult that you can see in the 21st century. Name one. There's a fantastic documentary on Netflix right now about how to be a cult leader. It's narrated by the Game of Thrones guy, Tyrion. Yeah. It all matches up. Sheep. But the relationship Jehovah's Witnesses have to sheep doesn't end there. In fact, in many ways, it just begins there. And without question, whether you want to point at the Bible writers or the guys the entire Bible was written for, as claimed by the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, it is incredibly fitting. The similarities or the brilliance of those that started this entire conversation only make it more appropriate and allow it to continue for Jehovah's Witnesses. But the governing body knows, they know, that sheep are followers, that they suspend their brains and any critical thinking, and they follow those leading them, often to their own peril. And it's interesting, I came back from the pumpkin patch after watching this and thinking about this far too much instead of enjoying a beautiful day, especially in light of what I know is going to happen over the next 2 weeks. We're going to run into witnesses who are like, "What? What change? What new light?" Most of them never watch it, never hear it, or will hear it through the rumor mill. I just couldn't help but be impacted by the woolly guys. So I went back and I wanted to learn a little bit about sheep. And this whole illustration that I had just accepted my entire life, that I followed, and that makes me so uncomfortable to even say. So I went to a little site called sheep101.info, and I looked at the first subheading, "Follow the Leader, Wait for Me." Did you know this about sheep? We're going to cover a few things on sheep here as to why it's so appropriate in reference to Jehovah's Witnesses. It said this, quote, "Sheep have a strong instinct to follow the sheep in front of them. When one sheep decides to go somewhere, the rest of the flock usually follows, even if it is not a good decision. For example, sheep will follow each other to slaughter. If one sheep jumps over a cliff, the others are likely to follow. Even from birth, lambs are conditioned to follow the older members of the flock. This instinct is hardwired into sheep. It's not something they think about." End quote. Sheep101.info. For the Jehovah's Witness living the Jehovah's Witness life, this should all sound very familiar. In fact, this dynamic defines their life. As the experts there stated, it's hardwired into them. It's not something they think about. A Jehovah's Witness looks at everyone around them, for most of them being born and raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and they just get in line. If one person, often a parent or an elder or a circuit overseer, tells them, oh, no, this is the way, they just obey blindly, like sheep. Their brains are turned off. They don't think. And they were trained by the governing body in this organization to be that way. Our brains formed by the age of 4 years old. Is it any wonder that the God Squad in New York are ramping up this type of propaganda to Jehovah's Witness children? If they get those kids and those people at that age, there's a good chance they create a new sheep for life. And as I just read from a noted sheep expert, lambs in particular are conditioned to follow the older sheep. And if you didn't hear it, even if it's right off a cliff, to their slaughter. The illustration of sheep is an appropriate one when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah, it's lifted from the Bible, but boy, is it implemented by this cult. The flock mentality is alive and well in this religion, and it always has been. Sheep follow the sheep in front of them. It's planted there, or as the reference says, it's hardwired into them. By isolating you as a witness from all worldly people, higher education, and just basic life experience, they can turn you into a brainless sheep. And one of the ways they do this is by surrounding you by, guess what? Other brainless sheep. And they call it things like good association, or God's chosen people, or one of my favorites, the great crowd of other sheep, or any number of other things. And that person and all of us can become dependent on that flock dynamic. You see this as evidenced in their weekly meeting schedule, keeping all of you and all of us at one time grazing with the other sheep on the food they throw down on the ground. It's part of the plan. Consume and obey. And by conditioning sheep to associate together with other sheep, they establish the one thing they really want as the governing body. They establish power. They've created a vulnerable, in many ways helpless, disoriented, non-thinking, brainless sheep. And this is not meant as an insult, but it must be stated. We're going to see this in real time with this annual meeting. People just accepting something so absurd, something that obliterated their doctrines, obliterated a century of field service by people alive and dead, that just obliterated it all, and they're just going to follow the flock. It's hardwired into them. It's how they think. That's from a biologist. There couldn't be a more appropriate animal to describe Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's certainly uncomfortable to say. But they've created this, folks. They create this, and that's why you hear this illustration. And I can't imagine where they could have gotten this from. Again, back to sheep101.info by the biology team. A couple more facts about sheep. First, they are social animals. That was interesting. I witnessed that at the pumpkin patch. Sheep are a very social animal. Animal behaviorists, this is a quote, by the way, pardon me. Animal behaviorists note that sheep require the presence of at least 4 or 5 sheep, which when grazing together maintain a visual link to each other. I witnessed this at the pumpkin patch. It continues with the subheading, quote, safety in numbers. Sheep are gregarious. They will usually stay together in a group while grazing. In fact, a sheep will become highly agitated if it is separated from the group. It is the banding together in large groups which protect sheep from predators, which will go after the outliers in the flock. End quote. This one is like a gut punch. It's a gut punch. The comparison of a loyal Jehovah's Witness to sheep just becomes more and more appropriate, more apropos. I know this is uncomfortable. Got to keep saying it. But considering what I just shared about our woolly friends, consider this as a Jehovah's Witness and a sheep. What is the very first thing the governing body takes away from a sheep like Jehovah's Witness if you are disobeying them, if you're not blindly following them? What is the first thing they take from you? They take away the rest of the flock. Right? They immediately remove you from the flock. They call it shunning or disfellowshipping. And I just read to you what a sheep likes, what a sheep requires by a biologist. Without the safety of the flock as a witness, you're officially a lost sheep and you're vulnerable to danger. The very thing every sheep is conditioned to know and feel safe around, which is the flock, other sheep, is taken from you. And for a witness, this might happen because you didn't want to follow the rest of the sheep off that cliff to their slaughter. But those other sheep are still all you've ever known. And by creating this dynamic and knowing this about sheep, the governing body have established power. The governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses knows that sheep need other sheep to be happy and safe. And they know how to take it all away by just removing you, getting rid of you, just like our furry friends. And how absurd is this? To use the Bible's illustration of sheep and their vulnerability, but then turn and use it all against them? Some people would call that evil. Imagine a shepherd who sees a sheep stray or not come to him on command, as noted, then taking the sheep and throwing it down a ravine or purposely kicking it out of the flock and kicking him toward the incoming predators. Can you imagine a shepherd doing that? What? You can't? You can't imagine a shepherd doing that in this little illustration? Well, neither can I. But that is exactly what the governing body does to sheep under their care. And the fact that any Jehovah's Witness knows they do this and supports this arrangement, ironically, only proves that you are indeed a sheep. You consume food and you obey, even when it goes against your biology, what's hardwired into you, what you are as a sheep. The governing body creates stifling dependence on them. 9 guys none of us know in New York. Strict obedience is required of a witness to stay in the flock, and more importantly, to be protected, as noted by the sheep themselves, the Bible illustration, and their own literature, to be protected from the evils of the world. And you can't help but go, wow, this is really an appropriate illustration. You can see it in real time at a pumpkin patch. This is all things sheep. But it doesn't stop there. Keeping with their favorite animal, see if any of these things may hit too close to home for you, whether it's in the solar plexus, the gut, or it just makes you nauseous. Back to sheep101.info, the biologist says there, quote, some other factors, or characteristics, I should say, of sheep. The first one, flee, not fight, is the subheading. Sheep are a prey animal. It goes on to explain, when they are faced with danger, their natural instinct is to flee, not fight. Their strategy is to use avoidance and rapid flight to avoid being eaten. Some primitive sheep breeds may be able to evade predators more effectively as their natural instincts are stronger. Note this, quote, domesticated sheep have come to rely on man for protection from predators, end quote. Would you look at that? Sheep as an animal live in fear. They're a prey animal. They have zero instincts on how to fight a predator. Do you guys even want me to go there? There's a million ways I can go with this. Do you want to hear or have me bring up child safety issues within the kingdom halls of Jehovah's Witnesses? Do I need to talk about how children are preyed upon, then told to shut up by both the abuser and the shepherd, the governing body, the elders? Do I need to mention women, sheep-like Jehovah's Witness women, staying in abusive relationships because divorce, oh no, divorce is a bad thing. You see, Jehovah's Witnesses are taught, it's hardwired, that much like our woolly friends they're compared to have no instincts to fight. They have no instincts to fight. They simply stand there in the pen. They consume what is in front of them, and they obey the shepherds. Even when it's obviously wrong, dangerous, as we've seen in recent times among the kingdom halls of Jehovah's Witnesses, criminal, and even deadly. They just consume and obey. And I beseech a witness that is listening to this whole illustration of sheep and what it means to you, to pay attention to this. I know it may not feel good. I remember it not feeling good for me. I never thought of myself as a sheep. I wanted to be a lion. But sheep are taught to not fight, to roll over. Incredible. This illustration takes on a whole new impact when you consider the animal a witness is supposed to be like. But isn't it sobering to learn, in that last reference, that domesticated sheep completely rely on men for protection? That couldn't apply, could it? I'll let you be the judge. In the Watchtower of 2014, August 15th, page 21, we are told this, quote, in effect, Jesus also conveys Jehovah's voice to us as he directs the congregation through the faithful and discreet slave. That's the governing body as of 2012. Back to the quote, we need to take this guidance and direction seriously, for our everlasting life depends on our obedience. End quote. How about maybe just one more? The Watchtower of 2011, July 15th, page 24, the Simplified Edition, tells us this very stately for any sheep listening, quote, we need to obey the faithful and discreet slave to have Jehovah's approval. End quote. Domesticated sheep are dependent on men for protection. Jehovah's Witnesses are dependent on men for protection. They have no fight in them. And it's for this reason, with new light or ever-shifting doctrines or anything that you may encounter that drives you insane about witnesses, is so unsettling. Because people we love sit there in those kingdom halls, and I'm going to get a little out of bounds here. They just sit there glazed over, some of them half asleep, drool running down their chin, not paying attention to anything being told to them, how they're being conditioned, how they're being hardwired, how they're being lied to, and they just do two things. They consume and they obey. I know you know the frustration. I have the frustration. People we love, good people, sitting there supporting this stuff, supporting a cult. Because they have been taught, like a sheep, to be dependent on men. But Sheep 101 continues under the subheading, get this one, safety in numbers. It says, quote, after fleeing, sheep will reform their group and look at the predator. They use their natural herding instinct to band together for safety. A sheep that is by itself is vulnerable to attack. End quote. I saw this. I'm at the pumpkin patch. I'm eating a pumpkin cookie. It's a beautiful day. But you enter the pen to feed the sheep, and guess what they do? They get together. And one that's on the outside of the flock is incredibly vulnerable. And with this little fact about sheep, it makes the idea of shunning and kicking young people out into the world without any reference point or any education on how to deal with the world a particularly cruel and, might I add, appropriate piece of Jehovah's Witnesses and sheep. And apparently they know it's deadly. I'm not going to bother to go into the endless references to parents on how to shun their own kids. Kids they raised in this mundane, ill-equipped flock, teaching them to fear everyone and everything outside the flock, then throwing them out there and shunning them. It is stunning abuse, all made even more ironic by the fact that most Jehovah's Witnesses can tell you that, oh yeah, Satan is like a roaring lion seeking to devour someone. But then, in the other side of their mouth, say, let's give them access to my wounded sheep. All from the same book and from the same organization they claim is being run by someone they call the Great Shepherd himself, Jesus Christ. And so this illustration of sheep, and standing there observing them, it was so painfully appropriate. Jehovah's Witnesses are sheep. And it's terrifying. It continues at Sheep 101 where it says, the subheading, they never walk a straight line. Sheep tracks are never straight. This one grabbed my attention. It says, quote, the winding of trails allows sheep to observe their backside first with one eye, then the other. Sheep can spot dogs or other perceived forms of danger from 1,200 to 1,500 yards away. End quote. Unbelievable vision. And I found this particularly interesting considering the line a Jehovah's Witness is told to walk is constantly changing. It's never a straight line. Wouldn't you agree? And it seems, after reading this, that sheep are built for that. What an appropriate illustration. In a never-ending, winding path that's never straight, a Jehovah's Witness is in fact a sheep. And sheep are built for it. They're built to walk a crooked path. My time as a Jehovah's Witness made me car sick. Okay? I would get car sick all the time in field service. Something you thought, but again, I'm speaking mostly to emotions, teachings, and whatnot. Something you thought was concrete, a concrete straight line just 2 weeks ago, in real time right now, was obliterated in one annual meeting. Sheep are the perfect animals for shepherds who are constantly changing the path, changing direction, even as the shepherd and the sheep are on the path. Sheep are built for it. They don't pay attention. They consume and they obey. And as I just shared, a sheep is looking at the ass in front of them and just following it. And I'll give you one guess who the asses are. After a lifetime of strict obedience, a Jehovah's Witness, and likely many you know and love at this very hour, currently can't see that the sheep in front of them is actually 9 wolves in sheep's clothing. You knew it was going to sneak in here somewhere. They're not paying attention because they're not built for it. Just be a sheep. They don't think. They're hardwired not to think. They're hardwired to stay together and follow a crooked, ever-changing path. They'll do it right to their own death. They'll waste their lives on their way to the slaughter. You can see this among Jehovah's Witnesses. Attend a meeting, attend a convention, look around, look at the faces, follow them through life. This is one of the most appropriate illustrations ever lifted from the Bible and leveraged by the governing body to their benefit. But Sheep 101 continues. It's under the subheading Keen Senses. Sheep have excellent senses. Oh, well, this may obliterate the illustration, right? It says, quote, their wide angle of vision allows them to see predators. They can direct their ears in the direction of sound. They are very sensitive to what different predators smell like. End quote. And I got to tell you, in keeping with the illustration of sheep, everything outside of Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body stinks, right? It stinks. Everything. Oddly, a witness can't seem to smell what they're being force-fed from the predators in sheep clothing in New York. And look, time doesn't even permit to go into the depth of what this does to the human brain. We've talked about it. It sneaks its way into every conversation I have. A witness also can't seem to smell bullshit when offered to them in a watchtower, or as noted many times 2 weeks ago at an annual meeting. When you do see the video, you'll marvel at the sheep. Jeffrey Jackson is obliterating the religion, and the sheep are giggling. Listen closely when you get to see it. They're laughing. They're giggling. They're consuming. And they're obeying. And as for vision, this struck me from the biologists about sheep. They have incredible vision. Do I really need to break into song for those from my generation? Sing along with me. When you keep your eyes on the prize. Oh, yeah. My mother's favorite song, incidentally. Hurts my heart. They've got their vision locked up too. One final point from sheep101.info, the biologist, that I found particularly interesting. And this one really kind of rocked me in terms of this illustration of sheep and witnesses. The subheading is pain. Pain. And it says this, quote, sheep have an amazing tolerance for pain. They do not show pain because if they do, they will be more vulnerable to predators who look for those who are weak or injured. End quote. This one didn't sit well with me. I guess in my journey out, I've been able to laugh at the whole idea of being a sheep because I was one. I can relate to it. I know how uncomfortable and how insulting it can come off. But to learn that sheep have an unusual tolerance for pain, well, that hit different. And that one might be the most gut-wrenching similarity of all. Because Jehovah's Witnesses have an unusually high tolerance for pain. I'd spent my life in Jehovah's Witnesses roughly since I was 4 years old. I was baptized on May 25th, 1985, at 17 years old. I walked away from Jehovah's Witnesses in February 2009 at 42 years old. I was a sheep for 38 years. And I got to tell you, straight up, I endured my share of pain. And yet I kept coming back for more. It's impossible to measure emotional pain or disappointment, but I'm sure anyone listening understands that there is a lot of pain in the life of a Jehovah's Witness. I can start with the mundane and go to the tragic. But just to name a few, I endured giving up on my dreams of what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. I personally endured marrying someone very young, someone that I never should have been married to. I've endured all the pain that comes with lost time. I've endured financial pain. I endured losing several friends in death that just needed blood to stay alive. I've endured losing people that I love very much who now shun me. And all of this, all of it pales in comparison to what victims of child abuse endure in this religion. Or how about those that gave their lives to protect a publishing company, giving their lives in other countries during persecution? Or those that are just sitting there miserable as hell. If one of you is listening, huge hugs. There's a lot of pain among the, quote, happiest people on earth, quote, the great crowd of other, sheep. Jehovah's Witnesses know pain. And like sheep, they hide it. They're told that they're the happiest people on earth, sheep on earth. If they feel otherwise, by the way, the problem is them. Sheep are to consume and obey. And as their little animal, spirit animal, they are able to endure tremendous loads of pain. And I think that that hit different for me. Because I know that there's some listening. There's some on the fence. There's PME, POMOs, Pomeranians. I don't know all the acronyms. I always get them wrong. But there's someone in a lot of pain right now among Jehovah's Witnesses. And they're supposed to be just a happy little sheep. Maybe it's someone who considers himself a believer in all things Jehovah's Witnesses that is currently disfellowshipped and kicked out of the flock. We know what that does to sheep. They die. They're vulnerable to predators. If anything else, they get disease and die because they're not with the flock, with the people they love, like sheep. Jehovah's Witnesses endure a boatload of pain. And learning this about sheep, I got to tell you, it hit different. Just huge hugs to anybody out there. Please consider this. But I'll tell you, we can't consider all things sheep without considering how uncomfortable it is to be considered a follower. Would you agree? I've never been a person yet who likes to think of themselves as a follower. No one likes to watch that sheep like I was in the pumpkin patch and think, well, hey, that's me. Although I have to admit, the hair and beard are now white, like my sheep buddies. That was one thing we had in common. But look, at the end of the day, sheep, they're followers. They're followers. It's that simple. Their brains don't think, and they follow. So aren't we glad that these little animals almost always come with someone ready to help them, to keep together? It's taken me a minute to get here, but you know what I speak of. We rarely will go out to a farm or anywhere else and see sheep just wandering alone. A Jehovah's Witness is told it's okay to be a sheep because they have a shepherd. And wow, do things take a turn when you consider who is the shepherd for Jehovah's Witnesses. We can all rest better if we know who that is, right? If you're a witness listening, you could rest better. Well, just a reminder to Jehovah's Witnesses, the Bible tells you that, well, there's really only one shepherd for the flock of sheep. I invite you to take a look at John chapter 10. It makes it all very, very, very simple for any sheep-like one that is interested, particularly verses 2, 3, 14, and 15, where they state here, quote, "But the one who enters through the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The doorkeeper opens to this one, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all his own out, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him, because they know his voice." It continues, quote, "I am the fine shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I surrender my life in behalf of the sheep." End quote. Jesus Christ. And somehow the Apostle Paul got the message, he of warm and fuzzy fame, because at Hebrews chapter 13 and 20, he just emphasizes it, where he says, quote, "Now may the God of peace, who brought up from the dead the great shepherd of the sheep, our Lord Jesus, with the blood of an everlasting covenant." End quote. And you'll note in both of those verses, if you're a sheep-like person wondering, wow, who's going to protect me? You'll note that there's no mention of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. The Bible, if you're just going on that, and you respect that book for what it is, inspired of God, it seems pretty straightforward on this matter of sheep and shepherds. The Bible says that sheep will recognize the shepherd's voice, his voice. Again, no mention of Stephen Lett, no mention of Jeffrey Jackson there. The Bible said it was him, the shepherd, Jesus. Jesus likened people to sheep-like when following him, not an organization or 9 guys in New York. In fact, to take it a step further, he commands his followers to not follow men or anyone else not named Jesus Christ claiming to be a shepherd. And he seems like a pretty good shepherd, all things considered. Despite what you see in Jehovah's Witnesses today, especially their precious little people who may be sitting next to a criminal in the next congregation meeting at the Kingdom Hall or having their dreams taken from them, the Bible tells Jehovah's Witnesses the only shepherd there ever was or ever will be feels like this about them. Matthew chapter 9 and verse 36, where he says, quote, "On seeing the crowds, he felt pity for them because they were skinned and thrown about like sheep without a shepherd." End quote. I mean, I don't know. When I read that, it seems like he might have this shepherding thing down. And as for other people coming along and saying they were shepherds, well, Luke 21 verse 8, where it says, quote, "He said, 'Look out.'" This is Jesus the shepherd. "Look out that you are not misled, for many will come on the basis of my name, saying, 'I am he,' and the due time is near. Do not go after them." End quote. Makes sense. We've learned and we know that sheep follow only their shepherd's voice, as mentioned at the outset. That's both the biological sheep, I saw it at the pumpkin patch, and spiritual sheep, if you're a Jehovah's Witness. And look, because we are all apparently sheep, Jesus was just repeating what he had already said about following any other man, woman, or anyone claiming to be a shepherd. Because at Psalms 146:3, he says the one scripture I use on every Jehovah's Witness, quote, "Do not put your trust in princes, nor in a son of man who cannot bring salvation." End quote. And there it is. There it is. I know that all of this, as I mentioned over and over again, because I just want to validate it, it all seems uncomfortable. At least it does to me, and I've been out for 14 years. I'd been a good little Jehovah's Witness student since I was a boy, and I never got comfortable with the idea of being called a sheep. I mean, I never wanted to be a sheep. I didn't like it. So at one point, I began wondering why I was always hearing sheep mentioned with their pals in crime, I guess, goats. I'd seen both. Goats seemed to have more personality. They were at the pumpkin patch too. I watched them. I fed them. And I found myself thinking, well, what's so wrong with goats? A Jehovah's Witness is force-fed, be a sheep, don't be a goat. The judgment of the sheep and the goats. We've all heard them mentioned as if they're Batman and Robin. They're just joined together. Well, I got to tell you, after leaving, my curiosity got the best of me. I know, imagine that. And after seeing both animals there at the pumpkin patch and feeding both and standing with them and petting them, and after ignoring all things goat in my time as a Jehovah's Witness, I decided I needed to know what the differences were between a sheep or a goat. And I didn't need to look far. Sheep101.info, the biologist, says this, quote, under the subheading behavior. It's really something. Quote, sheep and goats usually exhibit different behavior. Goats are naturally curious and independent, while sheep tend to be more distant and aloof. Sheep have a sheep have a stronger flocking instinct and become very agitated if they are separated from the rest of the flock. It is easier to keep sheep inside a fence than goats. Sheep are easier to handle than goats. End quote. I know somebody's going, come on, Stacy, that's Captain Obvious. But I'd never put any thought to it. And well, you just can't make this stuff up. Whoever those goat and sheep herders were that were blessed to write this holy book known as the Bible, let's just say a big shout out. They clearly knew what they were talking about in building this illustration. And this is where the Holy Book and Jehovah's Witnesses intersect in a message that is undeniable. When it comes to being a sheep among Jehovah's Witnesses, it's truly all about control. Whoever wrote the Bible, whoever that nameless person was, whether you believe it's who they say it was or not, they were sure to create a divide between the followers, the sheep, versus the independent, naturally curious goats. And guess which one goes off into destruction? If you're a witness, you know the answer. The governing body got the message down pat. We don't want no goats in here. They got questions. They're curious. They're independent. And they won't let us control them. For Jehovah's Witnesses, it's all about being a sheep. Those stupid sheep will believe anything and even follow us right off a cliff. That's from the biologist, those studying sheep. And well, when you look at this, it's just too much fun. I know that anyone that's listening would probably say, look, if I'm going to have to choose a spirit animal, I'm going to go with the goat. And you can see this in real time with Jehovah's Witnesses. Just walk up to a book cart. What are you seeing? Who is standing next to the book cart? What are they doing? How many of them are there? What's the vibe? Just 3 or 4 people, which is what sheep require, flock together, which is what sheep required, standing there without an ounce of curiosity, suspending all thinking, following the guy in front of them, and just staring at you. And who are you again? It's a very good chance you're one of those goats. After all, you're an independent thinker. You are curious. You're not someone who likes to be fenced in. And isn't it something else? You, the goat, the curious one, approached them, the sheep, standing around in a little crowd, not looking at you, consuming, obeying next to a book cart. You can see this illustration in real time tomorrow. Find Jehovah's Witnesses with a book cart. The irony of being a sheep, standing there, motionless, just looking at people walk by, those people being the goats, and without the goats, without their curiosity, without their desire to be independent and to learn, they just stand there next to those book carts until space and time swept them away. Because they're sheep. And with that, the undeniable proof that Jehovah's Witnesses discourage thinking. Just turn your brain off at the door. Come to the Kingdom Hall, but suspend anything that might even remotely stray towards curiosity. And consume and obey. And consume and obey. Obey and consume. Damn those goats. And there it is. And you know what else just hit me? You know what else just hit me just now in real time? This might also be why Jehovah's Witness men can't have beards. I never thought about it. Because guess who has beards, people? Goats. Goats have beards. Maybe that's what... Boy, they've really extended that illustration as far as they could possibly get it, haven't they? But back to my time at the pumpkin patch. In the end, I found myself feeling sorry for the sheep. I stood there looking at my pals at the pumpkin patch, feeling downright bad for them. And you might say, why? It's not for the many reasons I just ranted on about. It's for something far worse. It's for something much, much worse. By far and away, the thing that made me most uncomfortable about being a Jehovah's Witness sheep was something most Jehovah's Witnesses miss entirely. But it was something I thought of since before my feet could touch the floor while sitting in the Kingdom Hall. It was the very reason I wanted to be a lion or a black panther or an eagle or maybe even a goat. What is it about sheep that pained me and makes me the most uncomfortable? It's how the story ends. And to really land the point home, let's let the governing body tell us how a sheep's story ends in their own words. In the Insight Book, Volume 2, under Sheep, quote, "Sheep have from the earliest times been offered in sacrifice. Sheep provided the Hebrews and other peoples with numerous products. From the horns of the ram, containers and sounding horn were made. Sheepskins sometimes served as clothing. Sheep served as an important item of trade. Mutton and lamb were enjoyed regularly by kings, governors, and others. At times, female lambs could be presented as communion sacrifices, sin offerings, and guilt offerings." End quote. Sheep are nothing more than a resource. Unlike other animals that fight to survive, sheep consume, obey, roll over, and die. And as of last week, those of us that identified more with those independent thinking goats that are hard to corral, well, we can now live the life of a goat and get into the same paradise Jehovah's Witnesses are getting into, all at the last minute in the Great Tribulation. My visit to the pumpkin patch was awesome. It was gorgeous. It was fun. Great, beautiful fall weather. A pumpkin spice latte, pumpkin cookies, and a great time watching the little people run all over the farm. But more importantly, the reminder, I'm not a sheep. And you shouldn't be either. Wherever you may be, I hope you're enjoying pumpkin season. Be well.